Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode and we will discuss on governing the metaverse. We have our world famous speaker, Mr. Rob, Mr. Eric, uh, Mr. Patrick, David Smith, Mr. Philippi, and Mr. Flex. First, I would like to give chance Professor Rob.
Yes, good morning. Well, governing the metaverse is going to be interesting. That while we talk about the metaverse as if it's a thing, it isn't at the moment. It is a bunch of things. The metaverse, as Facebook is creating it, versus how NVIDIA is creating it, versus how the other folks that are using the underlying tools are creating it. Each one is more of a walled, separated garden, much like it was back in the CompuServe and AOL days. Than it is like the current internet. And of course, we're not doing a tremendous job in regulating the internet at the moment. So you can't really point to what we're doing with the internet and say, yeah, we had to do that with the metaverse, given the fact that the control over the internet is very diverse and I think many would argue substantially lacking in terms of assuring things like equal competition and free flowing of revenue, as the lawsuits against Google and Apple and Facebook would attest. That'll get worked out over time, but right now, the metaverse isn't. It's more of a concept than a thing, or I should say, it's a concept surrounding tools that are focused on specific vendors who create these metaverse environments, whether that be a game or it's done for social connection or communication or for simulation. Each of the metaverses have a unique purpose. So for instance, take the metaverse that was created for BMW so that they could test their large factories. It's not clear to me why you'd want to regulate that until you became to a point where it might represent or have some impact on safety. Then you could say, well, maybe OSHA or an organization like OSHA should get involved and make sure that the representation of the digital twin was both accurate and any testing that was done that might affect human lives or safety would be done against a particular protocol in the metaverse to assure that when it was applied to the real world, it wouldn't kill anybody. That would be one of the things that may develop as we go through this. But until if we get to a common metaverse, something like the internet, regulation probably needs to stay fairly closely tied to health and safety as the metaverse is applied to the real world. And if we're looking at the metaverse is applied to entertainment, for movie creation, game creation where it's active right now, or anything like that, then the regulations surrounding the individual country that particular instance of the metaverse is in, that surround things like decency, protections over privacy, and certain rights will probably have to be modified and applied to that metaverse, much like they've been modified and applied to a certain extent to the internet that we currently have. But we probably should be putting together a framework. The framework should start off with talking about health and safety of the citizens, and looking specifically at the metaverse as it's used to build and simulate buildings and plants to assure that the plans are consistent with safety guidelines. For instance, if you build a building in the metaverse first, and then you translate it into the real world, typically your inspections will begin when the building is going up. You can get plan review, but typically plan review does not, in fact, I'm not aware of any plan review that includes the metaverse at this moment. And yet that's probably where the plan review should occur, at least partially, is in the metaverse, because that's where you can simulate whether or not safety protocols have been applied in the plan. And therefore, when you approve the plan and the metaverse instance, you're better assured that the final building will be safe against safety, fire, earthquake, or whatever natural disaster that the Planning Commission has dictated needs to be adhered to. The various laws, building laws, need to be adhered to. And then same thing with vehicles. We're using the metaverse pretty heavily to test autonomous vehicles. At the moment, I'm not aware of any of the regulatory organizations getting involved in that testing, and I think that's unfortunate, because that's really where you need to have the assurances that these autonomous vehicles are going to be safe and operate as intended. There's always a rush to get product to market. We've already announced level 4 cars for 2025 and 2026 with a generational change in 2026. But regulators probably won't, at least at this moment, probably won't even get involved until those cars are physical on the road and going through their traditional test suites. And right now, I'm not aware of any test suites that have to do with autonomous cars. Generally, the test suites that we're seeing are the same ones we had before, where you're checking against different types of collisions, rollover protection, and the rest. But there needs to be a deeper protocol that talks about the AI, how well it's protected, how it would degrade if there's a catastrophic failure, assuring that the thing does as it's supposed to. As we've seen with the Tesla vehicles, which are not even level 3 cars, they're level 2 plus, but promoted like they're level 4s. A lot of people have lost their lives because regulators didn't get involved in that process early enough. And now, of course, they're going back and suing Tesla after the fact, but lives could have been protected and deaths prevented if regulatory had gotten involved in the development of the AI and blocked Musk from calling it more than what it is before he released it to market. So those are lessons learned. But I think, at least right now, regulation should probably focus on where the metaverse is being most heavily used, which is in simulation and building, and make sure that safety protocols are applied during the metaverse testing to resolve any problems before the vehicle or building or structure is built and creates a hostile environment.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Philip, especially for this metaverse, there are a lot of questions. Still this technology finished, or how these things actually regulate? What type of benefit we will get from metaverse? Many things actually come from our audience. So what you want to share with our audience? Yeah.
Sure. I'm involved more on the community building, self-governance side. And I see the ability for communities to collaborate together using some of the scaffolding or the backbone that some of the quote unquote games have created. And the one advantage of games, you already have people that are a bit into technology and that have already come together, whether they're in teams or communities, really using some of these early metaverses, to have fun. But when you start having fun and the games have made a 180-degree turn, instead of me being a proprietary closed game, it's now open source, and the assets or the game pieces are owned by the community and owned by the individual. So instead of you paying money to participate, it's flipped on its head, a lot of this using blockchain technology to empower the communities to come in for free and build a safe place for them to collaborate. And a lot of these have now focused on what the community believes is valuable. And a lot of them have spawned into public goods. So as Rob was saying, a testing ground for high tech, top-down companies to virtualize their production process, and how the governance should be, traditional and top-down to protect consumers. We're seeing the opposite effect when you have a safe space for communities to start collaborating for common goods. The commonality is governance. And how do you fractally grow and scale with a larger community, keeping everyone's independent sovereignty and letting them all have a say and letting the community hear everybody? Well, you'll need some sort of governance for people to feel like they're being heard. Or maybe now there's a worldwide group where you have different people that maybe there's people that hold some assets or some game pieces, and they're more of the armchair player. They're more of, say, an investor, seeing the possibility of this community growing. And then there's the actual active participants. There's now a collaboration of co-ownership. So how do you, as a distributed group that maybe doesn't have a lot of trust, how do you now determine fair gameplay, fair revenue sharing? So we're all of a sudden seeing guilds and different groups come together where they use the blockchain and their voice as a governance layer. And we've been involved with governance in online communities for some time. And it's interesting to see the evolution of how do I have a vote? And when we think of that, I'm sure most voters in the political arena just think that they're powerless. There's two parties, neither one represent me. I'll vote for this one because they're the less of two evils. But it's incredibly exciting to go down the portal of different possibilities of governance. Some of them started very simply with, if I have more of this token, I have more of a weight of a vote. And we found that wasn't really equitable to all parties in the system. And right now we're exploring something called fractal governance, where you have to show up in person in a meeting, just like today's, and end the meeting in an hour and come to a consensus. And that consensus is already preformed of what the group finds valuable. Many of these groups are public goods. So if we were all, say, I'm quite into agriculture and regenerative agriculture, so I'll just use something passionate. But say a public good would be a park ranger. We do know that park rangers have a difficult job, and they're protecting the wildlife and the nature. And if they came together every week for their weekend reports, they could go through a fractal governance process to determine with their peers how to distribute maybe the bonus fund and leverage blockchain technology to develop their own wealth and sovereignty in a group. So that's just my take on some of the aspects that we've approached with metaverses, and that it really comes to governance at the end when we try and start building communities online.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Felix, what interesting aspect you want to add for our audience, especially when our audience youth from Asia Pacific and they have huge interest about metaverse?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think I'm going to echo a lot of what Dwayne said. I'm involved with with others here in this call in participating in the fractal process, which is a process centered around reaching consensus amongst your peers around a certain goal. So I see this being important when it comes to decentralizing the metaverse. I think making decisions on, I think probably spreading the equity of the metaverse, and ideally, if we see a metaverse, like a singular metaverse that kind of everyone plugs into, we'd hope that that's decentralized and where all the infrastructure and everything is being run in a decentralized manner, and you don't have someone like Facebook that controls and can pop in and control data and do whatever they want, and without any oversight. And then us having to go and ask the government to come regulate them, and then then you have all of the corruption and behind the scenes like the behind the door deals that go on. And so having this process, I think, is important, and it's something that I'm super passionate about. And so I create a lot of content around that, and I see I see the metaverse also being very interesting, because technically this is kind of like the metaverse. It's like a mid-level, like we're all online, we're communicating with each other. We don't know, we've never met each other in person, but we participate in these calls, and over on the Uddin fractals, the fractal process that we're doing, it's the same thing. It's a community of people that I haven't met anybody in person that I communicate with, but I'm developing friendships, and very similarly to what happens in the metaverse, when you're playing games, you end up making friends, and then you end up hanging out with them every day through the internet. And so Yeah, I think it'd be cool to eventually see, like we do these town hall like type events where you could be plugged into the metaverse and kind of like Minecraft. I see Minecraft being something that could play a big role into the metaverse as far as building your own worlds. And it'd be cool to have like your own little like legitimate like virtual reality town hall where we're all participating, and you have a little bit more of that next level of kind of feeling and seeing the people that you're engaging with, basically every week.
Thank you. Mr. Patrick. Mr. Patrick, can you hear me?
Do you hear me?
Yes.
I have some issue with the video, but I can speak. So for me, what is very interesting with the metaverse, that's the social interaction for our business into the future of the humanity. We need more interaction. We need also more interoperability. So with the metaverse, we have this possibility to join the centralized world with I would say, the normal world with the virtual world. So that's what I am interested about. And I am also involved with Felix Ruiz and Dancing Joy and Dwayne Philippi. We are into the same boat in a way, because we are into the fractal world. There is different fractal. With Dwayne Philippi, we have the Alien world based on the Wax blockchain. And we have also the Hidden Fractal by Dancing Joy. It's a communication platform to help the other fractals to communicate better and marketing better. And we have the Bywire Town Hall with Felix every Sunday of Bywire, where we try to join all the news of the week. So that's what I am involved in. And for me, it's an experiment at the moment. I have a lot to study on this technology, Metaverse. But for the moment, that's give a lot of interaction between the people, a lot of fun, and a lot of data and metrics that we can use later on to figure out how to continue the road. So nothing is frozen into the stone. That's very dynamic, and yeah.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Eric.
So Rob's point is right on the fact that the metaverse is just defining, and what is it? It's really just a name applied to the goal of what the network has been trying to do forever anyway, which is connect people and make things interoperable and remove friction. That's really what they do. But, I look at Matthew Ball's primer to talk about what are the pieces that make that work. Well, he talks about hardware, computers, networking, virtual platforms, interchange tools, standards, payment services, content services, assets, persistent identities, as you have all these identities that go over. And Rob's point is, and talk about how you track those and test those and where all those basic infrastructure to keep them from being misused or going off. That's a whole issue itself. But the other thing is, now we have this great ability to create and practice worlds ourselves. And as soon as somebody starts creating these things, physical or virtual, then people try and take control of them. And a lot of those lessons learned come from blockchain. Here's a block. We're going to do something great for the world. Everybody here gets a vote, right? Well, the first thing that happens is I say, well, my vote should be more. So I'm going to get together with Jason and we're going to start voting together. And so then Dwayne and Rob get together, and then Sharif and Felix. Eventually it evolves into two different groups trying to compete with. So it ends up being a competition. So as soon as you say, well, let's not do that again, the nice thing about the universe is you can take your code, go somewhere else and say, we're going to do that differently, and we're not going to let that happen again. Well, as soon as that happens, somebody figures out a new way. Oh, we'll buy proxy votes, and that's how we'll do it. Everybody will get one vote, but we'll buy, oh, okay, let's not allow that. So we've got iterations of iteration in the last decade or so of people creating collaborative environments, both physical and virtual, and people taking control of them or trying to take control of them, and some of them to disastrous effects. So it comes down to this point of it's really about people. So it starts with community builders, whether it's on auto safety or gaming like Dwayne is doing, or Dan Singay and Patrick are doing with some more common things, or like Jason is doing. So there's some community leaders here. In fact, Dwayne has taken the idea of let's go the gaming environment, because the games are places where people connect. They start playing, they share and create stuff, and then they try and share that to everyone. It can become a big entity or even a business. So it's kind of this connect, play, share, and grow and expand kind of thing. So part of it is how do you build communities? And we've got people here that are really building communities. And the other part is then, okay, so what do you run those communities on? Well, there's infrastructure. So there's blockchain, and there are people here, Patrick, for example, and Dan, talking about what is the infrastructure to capture the consensus. That you have to capture that consensus somewhere. In fact, one of the products as a group is your consensus. But then, okay, so now we've got a way to capture consensus. Well, what do we use to do that? What is the methodology? What process do we use to come to that consensus in the first place? So there needs to be some agreement on governance structure. In fact, they even need agreement on how to come up with what the governance structure is. And again, I applaud Dwayne and Dan and Patrick for actually working to come up with with what is that structure here, and how does that work. So but the other part of it is, in addition to the infrastructure creators and the community builders and the governance testers, and that there needs to be marketers, because people need to know this stuff. So that's one of the reasons why I'm glad Felix is here, is because he's creating content. I'm glad you're here because you're Dr. Sharif, because you're sharing that. Patrick is doing workshops too. So part of it is just, governance doesn't work without the communication of what people decided, where it's go, what should we use, how this has happened. So I say there's the infrastructure piece that Rob talked about, critical. There's the community development piece, which Dan and Dwayne and Jason and even Patrick have been going on. There is the marketing part, which you, Dr. Sharif, myself, Patrick, and Felix are going, and part of that is content creation. So Patrick is really doing some work on creating the content which lets people understand that. So that's how I look at governing the metaverse. Is people are starting to make decisions themselves because government isn't working so well in a lot of places, and those things have to collaborate and build.
Thank you, Professor David Smith.
Love the discussion so far, and Eric, you did a great job putting the pieces together, and Rob's intro was really good. The metaverse is not a recent construction as you look at it. The term metaverse first was back in a book in 1993. And I love what Dwayne was talking about with pulling the users together in a self-governance type model. But what you need to do is really step back and look at some of the other concepts. The metaverse is going to ride up on an infrastructure that already has some governance practices in space. And as Rob said, they don't all work now. We're seeing fracturing in that with, for example, Russia talking about disconnecting their internet from the public internet, and you already see that all the way around. But when you begin to look at it, one of the things that the metaverse has to do is in a governance mode, begin to set some standards. My favorite metaverse is not from Facebook. It's not the NVIDIA one, but there was a recent conference in Europe on the metaverse, and there's a company actually in Europe that won the Best Metaverse Award. It's a company called PEX, and I love their begin of their design to it. And then we're also seeing not just users with gaming and things using the metaverse. We're seeing government entities putting government functions on the metaverse. We're seeing Dubai putting their first, a metaverse city copy of the city of Dubai on there. So we need to begin to look at it. And as we begin to set standards, which are going to be so necessary, one of the things that standards have is not just the technical specification, but many standards have a code of conduct. And that's part of what I think Dwayne is beginning to develop there. It's out there. We're gonna have to see something that we're gonna have to have some KYC type of requirements in the metaverse, where you can verify real world identities. And really important, you got to be able to identify minors. There's a lot of physical laws, like the Protection of the Minor Act in the United States, that has to apply to the metaverse. And so those type of regulatory and governance have to come in place. You've got to have, and this is what we're seeing in the EU, we're seeing this in Asia, seeing in North America right now. There's a concept that they're wanting to put onto the internet, and by extension, the metaverse, called well-being, safe spaces for mental well-being. And the metaverse has to begin to do that. It's such a all-captivating environment that you'll lose yourself in it, and you need to begin to understand the mental well-being is very important there. And you've got to have, I hate the term, but you have to have a cross-industry database of bad actors. So kind of a metaverse jail. You've got to put the people into it. All right, that's kind of at the standards level. What's interesting with the metaverse is that real money is being exchanged on the metaverse. And right now there's dozens of cryptocurrencies on it, even though cryptocurrencies are being hit really hard right now. You're seeing, where do we put exchange fees? Right now, most of the exchange fees I've seen in the metaverse are in stable coins, but you begin to get that. So you have to begin to put a real financial environment in place around it. And just a couple more things. There is not a clear definition in the metaverse yet, because it's so decentralized and is just now beginning to deal with real issues. How does copyright law apply to the metaverse? We're already seeing the beginning of lawsuits around copyright law. And we're seeing not just companies filing them, we're seeing nation states and cities making copyright violation lawsuits. How does intellectual property laws apply to the metaverse? I mean, Sharif, I could just see them taking your image, making you a synthetic voice, and having you all over the metaverse. What does that do to your intellectual property? What does that do to your copyright? Contract law. We're gonna enter into contracts in the metaverse. Now, where do we do contract law? I know when I write contracts, because I'm headquartered in Texas, I want Texas as my venue to settle any lawsuit. Or is it the World Court as part of the United Nations? Or is it where? So we've got to do that. Tort law. So if Rob damages me in the metaverse, how do I do tort law? How do I do defamation law? If Rob defames me, that's going to be very common, I believe, in the metaverse from the metaverses I've played with so far. And we begin to see that going. And then, I hate to say this, how do we tax the metaverse? And that's going to be something that we're going to see heavily debated coming up, because if a lot of commerce moves to a virtual world where it's driven together and you have the emerging world with everything created together with virtual countries, with virtual cities, now who taxes whom? How do we do that? How do we do these things? And since you're really talking about governance, these are some of the real world things that have to be taken into place as we do this. I was I led a forecast for a U.S. government agency a few years ago on what the Internet of 2050 would look like. And what we really said there is the future of it's going to be incrementally driven. And even the metaverse is an incrementally driven advance. It doesn't take a forklift upgrade to get into it and things. But what the metaverse has done with what we've seen so far, it's incrementally advanced the technology, but in many parts, it's ignored the basic issues of governance underneath it, riding on top of the internet infrastructure governance. And just folks like Dwayne and like Eric said, others beginning to try to put the structure in it. But the challenge is many of us who put structure in do it with a regional view. And we need to go ahead and map out how it's done, how it's putting places in it. And in the text, one person says we use mind mapping to try to pull this together. I actually would challenge using mind mapping and really go and use something broader like an impact wheel, which you then have to put morphological analysis onto it. Because the metaverse being this virtual world, you have to take the common concepts that we can generate them and morph them, kind of like the shape shifters from the television series, shape shift them into how it can be used in a virtual world where there are not land boundaries, where there are not law boundaries. How can we reconcile the laws of Malaysia, the laws of Australia, the EU, North America, Brazil, and others into this metaverse universe? And to me, that's the big things we have to do in governance, Sharif.
That's very interesting that you say, David Smith, about to try to connect the different metaverse together. And for that, we have a fantastic tool. That's the mind mapping. That's not something new. That's already since the 90s that the mind mapping was born. And it's all about heuristics.
Patrick, mind mapping began back in the 20s. I'm a professional futurist, and those tools have been around a lot longer than that.
Exactly. And we use that concretely. It's not just theory. So we use that concretely into our fractals, circles, metaverse that we are experiencing. We have mind maps online that are totally dynamic. The people can send their contribution into those mind maps, and those mind maps are totally growing with the contribution of the people. So we spoke about the metaverse also as an impact on social interaction. Let the people interact better, and thanks to the mind map also, we can connect the different piece of data that we have, because those data can be on any website, any data source, and the mind maps are just collecting those links and do a nice experience into the diving of the knowledge. So because we speak about tools, and mind maps are very powerful for that.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Mr. Jason, are you with me? Mr. Dan.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you, Dr. Sharif. Thank you so much for hosting this, and thank you everybody for the great conversation so far. Sorry, I was a little bit late. I was trying to figure out some audio and video issues, so I missed what Rob said in the beginning, but I'm looking forward to re-listening to it. And yeah, thanks again for inviting me and having us here. I think this is a fascinating discussion. So I don't know exactly what I should say, but I'll just say quickly. One, I'm also with, I'm working closely with Dwayne and Felix and Patrick and Jason and Eric on Fractal Governance and Fractals. I've been working with Dwayne at the Alien Worlds Fractal in the Metaverse, and I think that Fractal Governance will be profoundly helpful for the Metaverse as well as everybody in the world in general, in the physical world. We're also working on several other fractals with this innovative new way of reaching consensus. And I think that Eric did a great job of outlining or kind of giving an overview of that before about how it's necessary to reach consensus and reach consensus about how you reach consensus and so forth. And then stuff that David was saying too about the need for like figuring out how we'll govern the Metaverse in all these different ways as far as like laws and liabilities and taxes and so forth. That's also good points and helpful to explore. So one thing I mentioned there is the book More Equal Animals that was written by Dan Larimer, who is it seems like David is familiar. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that. But yeah, Dan Larimer, I think everybody's probably familiar. I'm not sure. It's nice to meet you, David and Rob. I'm not familiar with the work. I'm learning to, and I'm looking forward to learning more. But Dan Larimer wrote More Equal Animals, which provides the principles behind what we're doing with Uddin and with the Fractally process now. So that provides many helpful insights for how to reorganize and how to navigate our way with the existing legal system and how to improve legal systems and improve taxation systems, and then also avoid liability on an individual level and organizational level and so forth. So I think that provides many helpful insights that are relevant to what David was saying. But yeah, other than that, just thank you once again, Dr. Sharif, for hosting this. And yeah, I'm very much enjoying everybody's conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, and More Equal Animals really just covers a lot of lessons learned looking at hundreds of years and more of democracy and just a few decades of blockchain. So it's really about saying, look what we've learned where governance can go arise. And then in implementing that, Dan Larimer also wrote a white paper on fractal government that says, here's how you'd actually put a system in place to do some of this stuff. And that is an evolving process because no one's really done it before. So we'll see how it goes, but we've got a lot of pioneers here right on that. The other thing, in the metaverse, Dwayne brought up the idea of trustless environments. So, a lot of times in the metaverse, if in the real world, if you were to go get a hotel room, you book a hotel room and they may or may not give it to you. They can book that room out to all of us. And the first one that shows up, they give it to us and they can pull and change. When you're using writing this, the problem with a lot of metaverse governance is in code. So if you do that room, you could talk about staking, that room is not available to anybody else. They've put that room up and you've put your money up for staying in that room. And when you get proof of work that you actually use the room, then that blockchain gets transferred automatically. So a lot of the check is the room real? Does it exist? Is David's money real? Does it really exist? Did David stay in the room and did they provide that work? And then it moves. So a lot of that is different than court systems where they say, well, you promised the room and it's there and you did. Well, what does that mean? So a lot of I think David brought up a really important, interesting point. How do you figure those things out in a trustless world that goes across Texas like he's in Malaysia where Dr. Sharif is? It becomes a pretty interesting environment.
And Eric, we have to decide which of my avatars was in that hotel room too.
Okay, great.
Yeah, that's true, because it could be your business, David, or your vacation, David.
It could be.
Mr. Jason, are you with me? Mr. Jason? I'm sorry, I think he has internet problem. Professor Rob, you know that World Talent Economy Forums, our major objective to creating more opportunity for the youth community in Asia Pacific. So what is your advice, how they can involve more with this kind of advanced technology like Metaverse, and what is your concluding remarks for today's session?
Well, really, the part of the metaverse that most folks can get involved in fairly early on is the creation of digital twins. The various bodies have agreed on a set of standards now that will allow you to create a digital twin and have it migrate across environments. And the ability to create those digital twins to actually take buildings and turn them into something that is digital, and fully tied to the real world. That's going to be labor intensive. And as we move to large scale projects like Earth 2 or smart cities, where you really have a high level of to make it work, you need a very high level of consistency between the digital simulation you're creating and the real world, and you have to keep them linked, otherwise your simulations won't work, and that's labor intensive, and so that's an area where an emerging economy can probably get involved, much like we had with India in the early days of the internet, doing a lot of the heavy lifting with regard to website creation. A lot of the stuff got outsourced over there to do, because it was very labor intensive, and similar thing here, as we create the various simulated environments, the work that needs to go in and creating the digital twins and making sure that they stay linked is not insignificant, and that should be enough to drive a significant amount of revenue and opportunity, particularly now that these things are mobile and can move from environment to environment. So you don't have to bet on one metaverse over another. You should now be able to create in one metaverse, and as long as you adhere to the standards that have been agreed, whatever you create can be moved eventually to somebody else's simulation, and you can charge for it. The intellectual property laws apply, and back to some of David's comments, a lot of the laws we have actually would apply to the metaverse. There are no exclusionary conditions to intellectual property law that prevent them from applying. But how the courts will consider them is something that we don't have any case law yet. And so the case law is what we're going to have to develop, and we may have to rewrite some of the laws as a result. But for now, the issue is less about the laws with regard to intellectual property and more about the fact we have no case law developed yet. And so we don't yet know how courts are going to decide, and that leads to a lot of inconsistency at this phase. And undoubtedly a lot of upset people. I also want to thank Dave for giving me a relatively long to-do list that I don't think has anything to do with his health and well-being. He went down a list of things for me to do that sound pretty dire. So just to be clear, thankfully I don't have the time to do that, Dave. You're safe from me attacking you in the ways that you pointed out, but I appreciate the list. In any case,
Rob, I already have your controls in my router, so I'm okay.
Yeah, that's probably fair enough. So as we move forward, because the metaverse is a physical mirror, will increasingly be a mirror of cities, states, and the planet. Making sure that government doesn't run into a bad place where they are now with the internet, where people that run the government have no clue, really seem to have no clue as a group what the internet is and how it works. That's the real underlying danger with the metaverse is as much the need for law. I mean, we have a need for good laws and controls. We do not have a need for the government to overreact, underreact, or put in place silly things that just create a bunch of headaches for people. It is very critical that the government come up to speed, governments plural, come up to speed on this technology so they understand it, and thereby when it comes to putting in place rules, the rules fit the problem and will correct whatever behavior they're attempting to correct, as opposed to having the typical massive amount of collateral damage that otherwise tends to occur when you have somebody trying to regulate something they don't understand. So the big problem that has to be overcome, and I think this, as technology advances at never a faster rate, The fundamental issue we have to correct is this disconnect between government and technology, where they tend to be operating a couple decades back. And when you're talking about technology that's now evolving on a quarterly basis, being a couple decades back in terms of knowledge and understanding is problematic, both for the development of the technology and for preventing people from misusing it. And we're certainly seeing an awful lot of abuse, even with the internet. The amount of abuse we're likely to get in the metaverse is undoubtedly going to be a magnitude above that if we don't get our arms around it. So right now, the issue for government is not just finding a way to monetize the metaverse, but to fully understand it so they know when they need to fix something, how to do it in the most effective way possible with the least collateral damage.
I think
Thank you,
Rob's
sir.
point. I think Rob's point about the government trying to take what's new and try to apply the laws the way they see it. Well, let's put this into something that we already know. When it's what they don't know is a problem. The other point I think Rob makes is about how to get the internet and digital twins, the metaverse. But it's a lot easier to get in the metaverse than that right now. You can do points like UC San Diego's just putting their degrees on a blockchain. That's something simple that makes this, open ledger saying you have this certification. So there's tools right now people can use that are getting easier. But more than that, anybody can start a group, people who are passionate about regional development in their area or games or animals or, like Dwayne, agriculture. You can either join a group or you can start a group, and there's a lot of support. You can even get grants and things like that to help support starting these groups. So you don't need to have high technical knowledge to jump in the metaverse and start doing something.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Philippe, what's your concluding remarks for today's session?
Such a great discussion of the collision of our real world and the current governance systems and laws. It's exciting, and seeing, I've been in the blockchain space for some time, so seeing that a lot of these new metaverses are struggling with that. Is it code is law, or is the human factor deciding what's appropriate? What is the, what is the sentiment for our group? So it's I really feel that this sort of discussion in person, or quote in person, is the first way we can participate. And there's a lot of different, say, gaming metaverses, or like Rob was saying, maybe not so much for big cities and governments, but kind of mirroring metaverses where people are putting a representation of what is in their backyard online. So what would be the best way to enter the metaverse is, if you have kids, maybe get them to help out. And I think the only technology you need is the internet. I really like the entrance into the blockchain space, where these games really need and want communities and participation. And it's a reverse role. I remember always hearing these horror stories of the parents left the house and the kid had the credit card, and all of a sudden he racked up thousands of dollars playing this centralized game. And I think if you have some of these safe spaces of games and you left the kids alone, they actually might, after you leave them for a weekend, might have a bunch of, tokens or assets in their wallet without having to rack up any debt. So there's this onboarding model that's been, come experiment with our systems and actually get rewarded for it. So it's sort of flipped that narrative on the head. And for community building and for public goods, I would say come join us and join us in our attempts to come to consensus for different groups. And we're starting what might seem like in the gaming industry to attract people into that come from that gaming atmosphere. But it's really an exercise to ask all these tough questions that we've talked about today. And it's drawing out, what are people passionate about? So I would say, what are you passionate about? Come learn for free, or maybe make some money in the different systems, And then you and your community can collaborate and use these systems because they're open source and they're wanting other groups to come onto these groups. It's a network effect. The true decentralized cryptocurrencies that have been consistent in their market value and growth have this thing called a network effect, meaning that enough people are putting their value into it, the system and the ecosystem grows in value. And it's the same with some of these more community governance-led ecosystems, that they have built a scaffolding and a base that you can bring your passions and what you want to do to your real community. And why would you want to do that? Well, first, it would have to be a safe space. It would have to not too much friction. The governance layer of making us feel like we all have a voice. And then there's extra value that enough groups collaborating, there's extra value that the system that we all can extract. And we're extracting value by listening to each other and by collaborating. So it's a different sort of value extraction because it's the value of the crowd. It's the value of the community. And that's where we're keeping these standards and high level of discussion and not having to censor or self-regulate a lot or bring in third parties to help monitor and keep this safe. It's because it's real people putting their voice out there. We're not having to do a KYC because we can see each other, we build some trust, and then we build something. So I guess if we didn't have Metaverse in the title, this would just be community collaboration using new tool sets, right? And thankfully, these tool sets have been built already that we don't need to raise the millions of dollars to build the scaffolding. We don't need to build the internet, the virtual space, the video call. So it's a prime time for us to have our voice be heard and do what's really passionate for us in our communities. And then the Metaverse as a success is going to be us bringing that value back to our real communities. We're just leveraging these tools to create more value.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, sir. Mr. Felix, what's your concluding remarks?
So I think what I'd kind of like to add is I think at the core of all of this is it's going to be blockchain technology. Because we have the Metaverse right now building on the current internet, but the internet is iterating through blockchain technology. That's why we have all the hype around cryptocurrencies. And I first talked about the democratic side of what we're doing, which is or like my involvement basically in cryptocurrencies. But I think that's the next step with any cryptocurrency. When it comes to blockchain, you got to have some type of, we talked about regulation. And so figuring out the democratic side of things is, that's where I'm really excited. But yeah, I think at the core, though, it's going to be blockchain technology that underpins all of it. And that includes the Metaverse.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you, sir. Mr. Patrick. Yes. What's your concluding remarks for today's session?
You hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. I want to follow Felix on this point. Yeah, exactly. The blockchain is a good, I would say, seeing as an infrastructure for the Metaverse, and that we are experimenting currently. At the core of the Metaverse, we have a DAO where there is consensus on chain, and we agree on chain through the smart contract. And we have real people that were inducted through, for example, Uddin on EOS. It's human layer. That's a human layer on top of our EOS blockchain, the EOS blockchain. So on top of that, we have a human layer named Uddin on EOS. And we have people that were inducted there. There was a CBIL check to see that there are real human and not bots. And they are rewarded with an NFT that prove their earlier access, and that saves the ownership. And also that's a proof of participation. And another tool that we use very frequently in our fractals or in our circles or in our community as a tool, we have also a voting tool to submit the consensus on chain of a group of people meeting together and share what they have made to contribute and to share what they have made to contribute. They can, if they want, it is not mandatory, but we encourage that they send their contribution. And for that, we have different tools. For example, the mind maps. We have also a Discord channel where they can send their contribution into a channel. We collect the information, we collect the data, and we turn all that into knowledge. That's the goal. And we want to have a lot of metrics because it's an experiment ongoing. So we have not all the answers. So it's a perpetual ongoing process. That's what I want to say.
Thank you. Mr. Eric, what's your concluding remarks?
Yeah, we didn't talk a lot of what Patrick brought in, which is the metrics, the measurements, the papers, the research that are going into that. But that's an important thing. Otherwise, I would just say it's good for people to go to moreequalanimals.com, see what you think. The book's free. If you're interested in that, go to gofractally.com and look at a white paper for somebody that's experimenting with it. I'd be interested in learning any more experiments. Yeah, last thing I would say is, Dr. Sharif, you're more than welcome to come play in the Alien Worlds Fractal and actually see for yourself how it goes. You'll probably walk away with some Trillium or some Crown or something like that.
I have
Thank
put
you,
a
sir.
link into the chat about moreequalanimals.com where you can read the book of Daniel Larimer.
Okay, thank you, sir. Professor David
During
Smith.
that we discussed, I have put some information into the chat.
Great discussion. I've loved all the points. I actually play in 3 different metaverses right now. And what's real interesting is I have a totally different personification in each one of them. One of them, I'm an entrepreneur. Another one, I am a scientist being able to go and touch that way. And another one, I'm a grumpy old man trying to see what the reactions are to see how it can be handled. So that's some of the things that you begin to do here. I do want to, with my background in security and stuff, throw one caveat out on the table here. The current version of blockchains are not secure. They're reasonably secure, but they're not secure. So that as we begin to go to the next generations, a bunch of the known problems and cracks will be fixed. But today, you have to have moderate trust in the blockchain because it really is not secure. They're really easy to compromise today. I talked a little bit about the other things. What are some of the things that are going to retard adoption of Metaverse? What are going to be barriers to really putting the governance process in place? One of them is sovereign governments can restrict access to the metaverse and by the people there. Companies can restrict access to the metaverse by it. So you've got this whole thing. You know, one of the reasons you can't do a massive upgrade of the internet is that function, because you can't. I mean, Sharif, didn't you get the email that the internet's going to go down for the next 2 weeks for an upgrade? It's not going to be there. Because of that, it's going to be an incremental advancement. The other thing is, as you begin to look at it, there's going to be really powerful intermediaries, monopolies that are coming into play, which will impact the growth and the governance of the internet. You know, there's going to be a heavy-handed of the government. We're already seeing that in places like China. You're seeing that in Russia. And this heavy hand of the government's going to be there. And, you know, I talked about earlier the whole regulatory side, the whole policy side. It's really going to be a patchwork of laws, policy, regulations for quite some while. So what that does is it really creates a big compliance risk and an enforcement challenge across all the worlds in the metaverse and the different metaverses as they connect and are doing things. So let me just end this with, because you always ask, Sharif, what's the impact on people? What do they need to decide? Metaverse is at an early growth stage. You know, I was an early user in Second Life. In fact, I think I still have a couple of accounts over in Second Life, which was an early version of what the metaverse has become. But you need to get in there and experiment with and play with. There's places to make money. IBM was a leader in Second Life of putting an island in Second Life for support. And it was really fun using that in a way where it got around the constraints that we see in a traditional browser interface. But so the companies, your students, you need to focus on applications. Don't focus on the technology that enables them. The thing we know is we're on a time, we're in a pretty steep Fisher-Price curve where technology is going to be rapidly changing. And not all these technologies are going to be backward compatible. But you have to begin to focus on the application and how it's going to be used. And we one of the things we've learned from telecommunications, from the early parts of the internet, is that regulating one part of the platform doesn't mean that the rest of the platform is regulated. And so you've got to understand the regulatory side of it and how it's changing. Secondly, focus on the market and transactions. Don't overly focus on the companies providing them. Because some of the small companies I've seen, like the one I mentioned earlier, PEX, they're doing really innovative things, and they're an extremely small team. And it's not the team at Intel and NVIDIA or Facebook and others doing that. But also understand the laws. You know, you have things like the Communication Decency Act. You have the Protection of the Minor Act. You have all the EU regulations with their new privacy laws coming out there. China just released a really extremely comprehensive privacy law that's going to affect the metaverse and do it. And how you begin to do that. So my final advice on that is understand that the future of the metaverse is here, and don't underestimate the potential of the metaverse, because there's momentum on it. One of the things when you begin to forecast a market, if a market goes above 5% penetration, it's going to go to whatever its market limit is going to be. And I think we're not far from seeing that stage of penetration on the metaverse. So adapt a test and learn model. I mean, that's why I have multiple personifications on multiple metaverses. You need to take the long view. And particularly in governments in your region and universities in your region, the long view is really important here, because your ability to take bets on it will be better served in the long view or the short view today. Focus and really spend time on what motivates the users. You know, you see governments jumping in. What motivates the government users? You see the city of Dubai setting up a metaverse city of Dubai. What motivates the users of that and the others? You know, focus on the demand. And finally, I hate to say this, but we need to commit to a responsible mental health protection, privacy protection, children protection, and protection of your intellectual property and of the financial exchanges that are being done on the metaverse. If we don't have those, the metaverse is going to become this creation that we can go play in, but it's not going to meet the promises of it becoming this global exchange. So, Sharif, that's my final remarks.
Thank you, Professor David Smith. Mr. Dan, what's your concluding remarks?
Okay, thank you, Dr. Sharif, and thank you, David, and thank you, everyone. I suppose I'll keep it relatively short, as I think that it might be more time than we expected already. And I'd also be interested to hear from Jason too. I don't think he's gotten the chance to speak because of the internet. But is something you're going to say, Jason?
I am here. Yeah, I'm sorry. I heard my name get mentioned as my internet was failing just before. So, bad timing. But yeah, I don't want to derail all the excellent points that are made. I think that I'll just pile on one more question about the nature of the gathering with Metaverse as to whether it is, what is the balance of it being a producer gathering or a consumer gathering? As we know, when you invite guests over and you have them to your place, you are entertaining them. And literally, they've come into your place, you are the entertainer. As we use media to seek our entertainment, we are entering another realm with our mind. And that entertainer, as David's point about the necessity of mental health focus, we have to understand that our mind is going on an adventure. And that for a moment, we're allowing someone else to introduce thoughts and ideas and media that can be so stimulating, that can be overwhelming, and that the effects of that in reality are not to be underestimated. And with that, as the gathering is, for who is the entertainer in this example, there are a lot of social platforms that have user-generated content. Like, for example, YouTube, I think it's an entertainment platform, but it's also a producer's platform. And that I think that's one dimension of the metaverse to evaluate, to look at, as to the nature of the gathering in the metaverse. Is this entertainment for consumption? Is this entertainment for production? And that's just one of the things I see in it. But thank you all for the conversation that we've had.
Thank you, everyone. Mr. Dan, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I'll just say, well, thanks, Jason, for sharing that, and I'm glad you could be with us and share that thought. And then, yeah, thanks, everybody. I'll also echo what Dwayne and Eric was saying. For people who aren't familiar with it yet, I would definitely recommend More Equal Animals as an excellent resource to help navigate this, and then also invite everyone to join the fractals that we're doing. We're meeting for several times every week to experiment with this process, which I think is super helpful, and it'd be great to see. I've been on the call here with people listening. We've got the Alien Worlds Fractal every Thursday, we have the Eden Fractal every Wednesday, Genesis Fractal every Saturday. So then these are just events that you can come and join and then experiment with the process that we're talking about, which I think would be, I think it's really helpful. And so just inviting everybody and just saying once again, thanks again so much for hosting this, Dr. Sharif, and everybody for the great ideas.
Thank you everyone for joining today's session. We're just finishing our 592 episodes. You know that we are collaborate with Pod TV, so it's live telecast in Roku. Beside that, South Asia Web TV, this is another largest platform from South Asia. They are also promoting our event, and most important thing is that we are taking a lot of action. Metaverse is important. We are interested to collaborate with your team, and beside that, if you have any good idea that will help to solve the unemployment problem of developing nation, definitely you can share. We have our institution, we can work together. Thank you everyone for joining today's session. I request all of our audience, please share our content with your government, corporations, and academy. Thank you, bye-bye, and take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.